Welcome to Evening Whispers of Love. In this story we hear about Ellen and Paul, friends since childhood, but now, is there something more stirring? Could there be more than just friendship between the two? Let's find out. Chapter 1. After the benediction. The town hall still smelled faintly of lilies and dust. Ellen Simmons stood near the long oak table where casseroles and covered dishes lined up in uneven rows, their steam long gone. Someone had opened the windows to let the Arizona heat escape, but the late afternoon sun pressed in stubbornly, laying pale rectangles across the worn wooden floor. Voices murmured all around her, low, respectful, careful, as if the wrong word might break her entirely. She felt broken already. At 35, Ellen had always been small but solid, her body built from years of chores and practical living rather than delicacy. Today she looked even shorter, swallowed by a simple black dress that had belonged to her mother once. Her blonde hair was pinned back too tightly, as if order might keep grief from spilling out. Her brown eyes, dark, steady, usually observant, were unfocused now, fixed on nothing in particular. Pastor George Simmons was gone. Her father had stood at pulpits for as long as she could remember, his voice calm and certain, his presence anchoring not just Ellen but the town itself. He had baptized children who now brought their own families to the wake. He had married couples who still held hands as they passed Ellen, pressing hers gently, whispering condolences she barely heard. Her mother had died when Ellen was young enough that memory had softened into impression. Warm hands, the scent of soap, a hum while folding laundry. But her father's death was sharp and sudden, a clean cut that left her stunned rather than sobbing. He had gone to bed with a headache and never woken. No warning. No time for last words. No time for her to ask what she was supposed to do now. Miss Ellen. She turned slowly at the sound of her name. Paul Fitzgerald stood a few steps away, hat in his hands. He hadn't worn it inside the church earlier, she'd noticed that distantly, but now he held it like something fragile. Paul was built thick through the shoulders and chest, the kind of man shaped by years in the saddle and under the sun. His dark hair was neatly combed, though it never quite stayed that way, and lines cut deep at the corners of his eyes despite his being only in his mid-40s. He had known her whole life. Since they were children, she'd been climbing trees and racing along the riverbank, and Paul had been there, always steady, always protective. She had trusted him then and she trusted him now. "I brought the truck around back," he said quietly. "Figured you might want to leave when you're ready. No rush." His voice was low, steady. The same voice that had told her not to worry when her horse spooked as a girl. The same voice that had spoken her father's name with respect, never familiarity. "Thank you, Paul," she said, the words automatic. She paused, then added, "I didn't even think about that." "That's all right." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable being the focus. "I can stay close. In case you need anything." She nodded, unsure what she might need, only that the thought of him nearby made the room feel less unsteady. Paul didn't linger. He never did. He stepped back into the edge of the room, becoming part of the wall again, watching without staring. He had been doing that for decades. From the time Ellen Simmons had grown out of braids and into her own strength, Paul Fitzgerald had loved her in a way he never named. When she was too young, he told himself it was nothing. When she was grown, he told himself she deserved better. She was the minister's daughter, educated, thoughtful, carrying herself with quiet dignity. Paul was a cowboy who smelled of leather and dust no matter how often he scrubbed. So he loved her silently, patiently, from a distance that felt safer. Across the room, Simon Wills did not believe in distance. "Ellen, my dear." She stiffened before she even turned. Simon Wills, the local banker, moved through the crowd with an air of ownership, his dark suit sharply pressed, his hair slicked back with more care than necessary. He was handsome in a polished way, all white teeth and confident smiles, and he knew exactly how people looked at him when he entered a room. He took Ellen's hand in both of his before she could stop him. "This has just been terrible," he said loudly enough for several people to hear. "Absolutely terrible. Your father was a pillar of this community." "Yes," Ellen said. Her voice sounded far away to her own ears. Simon squeezed her hand. "If there is anything you need, anything at all, you must come to me. Managing affairs, finances, arrangements. A young woman shouldn't have to shoulder these burdens alone." A few heads turned their way. Someone murmured approval. Ellen felt heat crawl up her neck, not from gratitude but from being put on display. "That's kind of you," she said carefully, trying to pull her hand back. Simon did not let go right away. "You know," he continued, lowering his voice only slightly, "your father often worried about you. About you being alone in that house. Now more than ever, it's important you have support. Paul's jaw tightened from across the room. I appreciate the concern, Ellen said, finally freeing her hand. But today isn't the day for these conversations. Simon smiled, unfazed. Of course. Forgive me. I only meant. I know what you meant, she said softly, and something in her tone finally made him pause. He laughed lightly as if she'd made a joke. Grief makes everything feel sharper. I understand. He patted her arm once, possessively, then turned to greet someone else, already reclaiming the room. Ellen stood very still. Only when Paul appeared beside her again did she realize her hands were shaking. You all right? He asked. She looked up at him, then really looked as if seeing him for the first time through the fog. His expression was controlled, but there was something fierce behind it, protective, restrained. I don't know, she admitted. I feel like I'm watching someone else's life. He nodded. That makes sense. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. I can walk you home, he said. Or sit with you. Or just stand here. Whatever you need. Her eyes burned, not with tears yet but with the threat of them. You've already done so much. I don't mind, he said simply. And she believed him. As the sun dipped lower and the crowd slowly thinned, Ellen realized something she hadn't allowed herself to think all day. When everyone else eventually went home, she would be alone in the parsonage. Alone with her father's books. His empty chair. His absence echoing off every wall. Paul was still there when the last plate was cleared. Let's go, he said gently. She nodded, taking one last look around the hall that had held her upright when she couldn't do it herself. Outside the evening air was cooler. The town lights flickered on one by one, and somewhere a train whistle sounded in the distance. Life continuing, indifferent. Paul opened the truck door for her. As Ellen climbed in, she didn't see Simon Wills watching from the steps of the town hall, his smile gone, his eyes calculating. But Paul did. Chapter 2: Shifting Winds. The parsonage felt emptier than it had that morning. Ellen moved slowly through the rooms, dusting where she could, stacking hymnals back on the shelves, rearranging the flowers left from the wake. It was a ritual she had once found comfort in, a way to pretend she could restore order to a life that no longer made sense. Paul Fitzgerald walked toward the church in the late afternoon, hat in hand, thinking of Ellen. His gaze swept the dusty streets, the mountains beyond the town, but his mind was full of memories. He thought of her in her 20s, engaged to Rowan Stock, and of how he had watched the situation unfold quietly, knowing Rowan had never truly been right for her. He had known that Ellen had ended it for good reason, though the rumors and whispers of scandal had lingered for years. He shook his head, pushing the thought away. There were other matters now. That morning, a telegram had arrived at his house, handed over by a boy who nearly tripped on the porch steps. Paul had read it twice. Over 100 cattle ranchers were headed for the area, part of a wave of expansion in the territory. A flood of strangers, of influence, of change. His stomach tightened. Ellen would need someone steady nearby. Someone she could trust. When he opened the church door, he found Ellen moving through the pews, dust rag in hand, humming softly to herself. Paul, she exclaimed, looking up. Relief and a small smile brightened her face. I'm glad you're here. I thought I'd check in, he said, walking closer. I sent for a new pastor, she said almost proudly, dusting the edge of a pew. He'll be arriving soon. Finally. I suppose that means I could leave the church's responsibilities behind if I wanted. Paul's chest tightened. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his voice. Leaving? Yes, she said, glancing at him, hopeful. I can move on, Paul. Maybe start fresh somewhere else. She stopped, noticing his tense expression. You can't leave, he said abruptly, more firmly than he intended. The words tumbled out before he could stop them. Not like this. You've got to stay, Ellen. You've got to be part of the town, part of what's coming. You can't just walk away. Ellen blinked at him. Paul, what are you talking about? He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly flustered. I mean, it's not just the church. Not just the pastor. This town, you've got roots here. Your father built this place. And you belong here. You can't just leave everything behind. Ellen opened her mouth to respond, but he interrupted himself with a sharp, frustrated exhale. I'm not saying stay for me or anything like that, just for yourself. For the town. For what matters. The awkwardness hung between them like the desert heat. Ellen studied him, surprised and unsettled by the sudden forcefulness in his tone. Paul, she said softly, unsure what to say, Before he could answer, the door burst open. Mrs. Cartwright waddled in, her plump frame bouncing with energy, bonnet slightly crooked. "Miss Ellen. There you are," she said, nearly tripping over the doorframe. "Simon Will simply insists that you dine with him tonight. And really, my dear, it's just perfect. You've been so alone since poor Pastor Simmons passed. Why waste time, Paul's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Cartwright," he said, voice clipped, "please? Not now." Mrs. Cartwright waved a hand dismissively. "Nonsense, Paul. I'm just looking out for Ellen. And don't think I haven't noticed your friendship, But Simon is a fine, upstanding man. A man of means. Truly, you'd be foolish to pass him up." Paul's temper flared, though he forced it down. "Friendship is enough," he muttered, more to himself than to her, and Mrs. Cartwright raised an eyebrow but ignored him. Ellen, caught between the tension and Mrs. Cartwright's exuberance, whispered, I'll go. Tell him I accept." Mrs. Cartwright clapped her hands together. "Oh, wonderful. That's settled then?" Paul's hand clenched at his side. "Do you want a ride?" he asked, trying to mask his frustration. "No, thank you," Ellen said, offering a hesitant smile. She lingered a moment, glancing at him, trying to understand the sudden edge in his tone, then walked out, still unsettled. Paul exhaled sharply, kicking a small rock down the dusty street. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. Years of quiet patience, of careful support, had just fallen apart in one moment. And for the first time he realized, staying silent, staying careful wasn't going to be enough anymore. He needed to make her see him. Chapter 3, Confessions and Shadows. The lanterns outside the small-town restaurant cast a warm glow over the boardwalk, spilling light onto the dusty street. Inside, Ellen sat stiffly in her chair, her hands folded in her lap, trying to be polite as Simon Wills prattled on about investments, land, and the virtues of a strong, capable man. "And you see, Ellen," Simon said, leaning closer, "I think it's high time we stopped this charade. You and we are meant to be married. Straight away. There's no reason to delay. You need a man who can provide, who understands society, who understands you." Ellen blinked, unsure how to respond. He was 20 years her senior, polished, confident, but she felt nothing in her chest except polite discomfort. I appreciate your sentiments, Mr. Wills," she said carefully, keeping her voice measured. "But I need time to consider many things." Simon smiled as if she'd agreed. "Nonsense, my dear. There's no time like the present. Life is short and opportunities don't wait." Ellen forced a smile and nodded, wishing she could just disappear. Outside the mercantile, Paul was loading crates of supplies when his eyes caught movement across the street. His jaw tightened. There she was, Ellen, sitting across from Simon Wills, laughing lightly at one of Simon's overbearing jokes. Carl, Paul's right-hand man, leaned over. "You seeing what I see?" Paul gritted his teeth. "Yeah. That's Simon Wills with her. And he's, being his usual self." Carl snorted. "That guy's a pig. 3 wives, all gone, and he treats women like they're checkers on a board. I wouldn't let him near my sister, let alone you know who." Paul's fists clenched around the crate he was holding. "I know. And she's too good for him. Way too good. I can't." Before he could finish, Ellen and Simon left the restaurant. Simon, convinced he had her attention, tried to maneuver her toward his carriage, but Ellen shook her head. "It's such a nice night," she said simply. "I think I'll walk home." Simon hesitated, blinked, then shrugged. "As you wish," he said, climbing into the carriage. He drove off, leaving Ellen alone on the quiet, lamplit street. Paul was already there, having followed at a distance. Ellen spotted him and walked toward him, relief in her expression. "I needed to get out of there," she said softly. He was insistent. "I didn't want to be rude, but I couldn't." "I saw," Paul said, his voice tight. "I'm glad you're safe." Ellen smiled, grateful. "I thought, maybe you could take me home?" Paul nodded, a mixture of relief and agitation coiling in his chest. "Of course." They walked together to his truck, their shoulders occasionally brushing. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. They climbed into Paul's truck, the leather seats creaking softly under them. The engine rumbled to life, and the tires hummed on the empty street. For a moment, neither spoke, the desert night stretching around them in quiet. Paul finally broke the silence. His voice was steady, firm. "Ellen, why did you break your engagement off with Rowan?" Ellen blinked, surprised by the directness. I don't know," she said after a pause, shrugging slightly, trying to keep the answer light. Paul's eyes met hers, unwavering. "You think you don't know," he said quietly, "but I think you do. You just don't want to say." Ellen looked down at her hands folded in her lap. The rumble of the truck seemed to fill the silence that followed. Paul continued, a note of frustration and sincerity threading his words. "The whole town's had their gossip and their reasons for why it ended, but I never believed a word of it. I've known you too long for that." Ellen was thoughtful, quiet. Her lips pressed together as if weighing every word before she spoke. I never told anyone," she admitted softly. "Not even my father. Not a soul." Paul exhaled slowly, hands gripping the wheel, eyes fixed on the road. The words hung heavy between them. He wanted to say more, to reach out, but he knew the right words weren't coming. He just drove. Ellen stayed silent, her mind whirling. And then, slowly, a clarity settled over her. She realized for the first time with certainty that she had always loved Paul. Not Rowan, not anyone else but Paul. The thought made her heart ache with a sweet ache, heavy and undeniable. The truck rolled through the empty streets. Paul's jaw was tight, his expression unreadable in the dim light. For the first time he felt the weight of years of restraint. And in the quiet of the night, he began to wonder, maybe trying to be with Ellen was a losing battle. Maybe her heart was set, or maybe he had waited too long. The ride ended. Paul stopped in front of her house, the engine ticking as it cooled. Ellen stepped out slowly, her heart still thumping, looking at him with something more than friendship in her eyes. "Thanks, Paul," she said softly. "Yeah," he said, voice low. "Anytime." She turned and went inside, leaving him sitting in the quiet cab, the desert still stretching on every side. The night felt heavier somehow, charged with unspoken truths, and Paul finally admitted it to himself. He didn't know how much longer he could keep waiting. Chapter 4: The Truth in the Night. Paul was asleep when a soft knock roused him from his dreams. He blinked, disoriented, and swung his legs over the side of the bed. Another knock, sharper this time, made him frown. Slowly he opened the door and froze. Ellen stood there, breathless, nightgown catching the moonlight through the window. Her hair was damp from the wind, cheeks flushed from running. She looked radiant, ethereal, almost unreal. "Ellen," Paul whispered, stepping aside. What are you doing here?" I had to come," she said, voice trembling. She stepped inside, shivering slightly. I need to tell you something." Paul closed the door behind her, heart pounding. She leaned against it for a moment, catching her breath, and he reached out instinctively to steady her. His fingers brushed her arm and she shivered at the contact. Before he could speak, she began, words tumbling out in a rush. "I never told anyone why I broke off the engagement with Rowan because I've always felt so ashamed. My father wanted me to marry him. A wealthy landowner, he thought he'd be best for me, his only child. But I never loved Rowan. One night, when he came to plan the wedding, I couldn't handle it anymore. I told him I couldn't marry him because I didn't love him, I loved someone else. He was furious and left town a few days later. I know the town has its sick rumors, but none of that was true. The truth is I love, and have always loved, you, Paul. But I never thought you felt the same. Do you remember when we were 10 swimming in the lake, and I almost drowned? You saved me. I have loved you ever since, and I never thought you could feel the same. And so I stand here now. I don't even know what I am doing. I can leave if you don't feel the same. But I had to tell you. I had to." Her words hung in the room, heavy with years of longing and fear. Paul's chest tightened, his heart hammering. Without a word, he stepped forward, cupping her face in his hands. Their eyes met, and the years of quiet yearning between them seemed to explode in that single electric moment. He kissed her, slow and deliberate, letting her words sink into the warmth of his arms. She melted into him, hands clutching his shirt, and he pressed closer, feeling the weight of all the unspoken feelings between them. "I've loved you too," Paul murmured against her lips, his forehead resting against hers. "Always." Ellen gasped softly, her hands threading through his hair, and Paul lifted her gently, holding her against him as if the world outside no longer existed. He carried her toward the bedroom, both of them laughing softly between kisses, breathless, hearts pounding. Inside the room they paused just long enough to take in the moment. Paul brushed hair from her face, fingers tracing the curve of her cheek, the warmth of her shoulders, the subtle rise of her collarbone. Ellen shivered, leaning into his touch, and he pressed a gentle kiss to her temple, then to the curve of her neck. They sank onto the bed together, holding each other close, bodies pressed, hearts racing in tandem. They whispered each other's names, laughed softly, and explored the intimacy of long-awaited closeness. Hands caressing backs, brushing faces together, lingering touches that conveyed desire, love, and trust. Hours passed, the world outside falling away as they held one another, lost in the quiet intensity of the moment. When the first hints of dawn crept through the window, they were still entwined, hearts beating in rhythm, the space between them filled with warmth, tenderness, and the knowledge that this was only the beginning. Chapter 5. Morning Light and Rumors. Ellen awoke to the smell of coffee and something sizzling on the stove. Blinking against the morning sunlight streaming through the window, she realized Paul had already been up. "Morning," he said, grinning as he flipped an egg in the skillet. "I figured you'd need some real breakfast after everything last night." Ellen sat up, her hair mussed and cheeks still flushed. "You made breakfast? For me?" Paul shrugged, trying to play it casual. "Seems only fair. I mean, you ran all the way here last night and you didn't exactly have dinner beforehand." She laughed softly. "I suppose I owe you then?" He set a plate in front of her, steaming eggs and toast arranged neatly. "Go on. And I swear I won't ask any more questions for the next, 5 minutes." Ellen picked up her fork, smiling, then shook her head. "I still can't believe, last night? I thought we'd never, say anything. We've both been so oblivious." Paul laughed, scratching the back of his neck. "Oblivious is one word for it. I thought maybe you hated me or something." Her eyes widened. "Hated you? Paul, I never hated you. I thought you didn't feel the same way." "I didn't think you did either," he admitted, grinning despite himself. "We've been dancing around each other for years, Ellen. Years." She shook her head, laughing, shaking off the lingering tension. "I can't believe we didn't see it sooner." "I've loved you forever, Paul." "Same here," he said softly, leaning back in his chair. "Forever. And now we actually get to start from here." They ate together, teasing one another between bites, and eventually got dressed. Paul chuckled as he tied his boots. "If anyone in town finds out, they'll have reason to gossip now. The whole town's going to lose its mind." Ellen laughed, smoothing her hair. "Let them gossip. It won't matter." As they headed into town, the dusty streets were alive with the usual morning activity. But before they'd taken more than a few steps, Mrs. Cartwright, plump, beaming, and practically vibrating with excitement, came running up to Ellen. "Oh, Ellen. Congratulations, my dear. Simon's been telling everyone in town that you two are to be wed." Ellen blinked, confused. "What? That's not true. Simon and I are not." Mrs. Cartwright waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, nonsense. Don't worry about it. Everyone's thrilled." Paul and Ellen exchanged a look, eyebrows raised. Ellen's eyes narrowed. "No, Mrs. Cartwright. There's been a mistake. I need to talk to Simon." Paul immediately stepped forward. "I'll go with you." "No," Ellen said firmly, turning to him. "I have to do this on my own. I can't let him think I'm intimidated." Paul hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but I'll hang around. Just in case." Paul lingered near the stables, watching the street. He spotted Carl leaning against the railing and jogged over. "You'll never guess what happened last night," Paul said, still a little breathless. Everything changed with Ellen. Carl raised an eyebrow and grinned. "Finally, huh? I've always known you liked her, Paul. I'm happy for you, really." Paul ran a hand through his hair. "Yeah. I've loved her for years, since we were kids. Last night I finally told her. She told me everything, why she broke off the engagement with Rowan, all the things she's kept to herself. And I told her how I felt too. I don't think I've ever been so sure of anything." Carl's grin softened, his eyes warm. "Good for you, Paul. About time. I'm glad she finally knows." Paul's smile faltered slightly. "I thought that would be it, that we could finally be together without any trouble. But..." Carl interrupted, voice serious. "Paul, you need to know. Simon's furious. He's threatening Ellen. Says if she doesn't marry him, he'll try to pull the deed on her land, and even interfere with the church." Paul's stomach tightened. "What? That can't happen. Not to her." "You heard me," Carl said firmly. "He's desperate and he won't stop. You need to get to her before he makes good on it." Paul's jaw set. "I will. I'm going to find her. I won't let him come between us. Not now." Carl clapped him on the shoulder. "Then go, Paul. Don't waste a second. She's counting on you." Just then, Paul spotted Ellen leaving the bank, papers clutched in her hands, moving quickly, looking tense. She hadn't noticed him yet. He ran to catch up. "Ellen." She spun, startled, eyes wide. Paul. Don't explain now, he said, grabbing her hand. We'll face Simon together. Whatever he's planning, we'll handle it side by side. But we have to move fast. Ellen's gaze softened, trusting him. Okay, together. Paul gave a determined nod. Together. Chapter 6. The Confrontation. Paul and Ellen strode into the bank, the small-town quiet of the morning doing little to soothe their nerves. They went straight to Simon's office, opening the door without hesitation. Simon looked up from his desk, a smug smile on his face. Well, if it isn't Fitzgerald and the runaway bride, he sneered. To what do I owe this pleasure? Paul squared his shoulders. We're here to tell you something, Simon. Ellen and I are going to get married. You need to respect that. Simon laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. Married? You, Ellen? And you, Fitzgerald? That's rich. And what if I don't respect it? Ellen's jaw set, her voice firm. Then you'll be hearing from both of us. We won't be intimidated by your threats. Simon leaned back in his chair, hands steepled, eyes glinting. Threats? Oh, I think you misunderstand. I have friends in high places. Ellen, you can marry me, or your land is gone, your church, everything your father built, taken from you. Paul's fists clenched. You'll never get away with threatening her like that. Simon smirked. Try me. Paul's temper flared. He shoved Simon hard enough to make him stumble backward in his chair. I said leave her alone. Simon lunged for the phone. I'll have you arrested for this insolence. Ellen stepped forward, voice calm but commanding. Paul, stop. We don't need to make this worse. Let's just go. Paul hesitated, breathing hard, chest tight with frustration and anger. He looked at Ellen, saw the resolve in her eyes, and nodded. All right, he muttered, taking a step back. Together, they left Simon's office, the door closing behind them with a thud. Outside the bank, the desert air felt like a release. Paul exhaled, rubbing his hands over his face. Well, that went about how I expected, he muttered. Ellen laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I thought you were going to punch him again. I wanted to, Paul admitted. But you're right. No sense in getting ourselves arrested before we even start our lives together. Ellen rested her hand on his arm. Thank you for standing up for me. Paul smiled, gently brushing her hair back. Always. You're my priority. Always have been. They walked back to the truck and climbed in, the engine humming to life. Side by side, they drove through the early sunlight, hearts still racing, but strengthened by the knowledge that together, they could face whatever challenges the town, or Simon, threw at them next. Chapter 7. Flames and Promises. The evening sun cast a warm glow over Paul's porch as he and Ellen sat across from each other at the small table, bowls of thick, hearty stew steaming before them. The smell of simmered beef, onions and vegetables filled the air, humble and comforting. They ate quietly at first, letting the warmth and simplicity of the meal speak for them. Then Paul set down his spoon, resting his elbows on the table and meeting her gaze. Ellen, he began, his voice low but certain. We've known each other our whole lives. All these years, and after last night, tonight? I can't wait any longer. I need to ask you, will you marry me? Ellen froze, her spoon midway to her mouth, then blinked, eyes wide. A small laugh escaped her, a mix of relief and joy. Paul, yes. Of course I will. Paul's grin broke across his face, reaching his eyes. Finally. It's finally us. He reached across the table, taking her hands in his. All those years, Ellen. I've waited for this. I've loved you forever. Ellen's eyes glistened. I've loved you too, Paul. Always. They lingered in the quiet warmth of the porch, hands entwined. Then Ellen's expression sobered. But we have to think about Simon. He's not going to accept this quietly. He's going to try to fight us. Paul's jaw tightened. Let him try. We'll face him. Together. Before they could speak further, a pounding came from the barn, fast and urgent. Carl came barreling up the porch steps, face pale and eyes wide. Paul. Ellen. I just got word, your house. Ellen stiffened. What about it? Carl's voice trembled. It's on fire. The whole thing, flames everywhere. Ellen's hands shot to her face. No, that can't be. Her voice broke and she took a step back, almost stumbling. Paul jumped to his feet, fury and fear flashing across his face. Carl. Which way? Quick. Down the road, come on. Carl yelled, already turning toward the truck. Ellen grabbed Paul's arm, panic straining her voice. Paul, My parents, everything. Paul's eyes softened for just a second, then hardened with determination. We're going. Together. Nothing else matters. He pulled her close for a brief moment, brushing her hair back. We'll get through this. I promise. They climbed into the truck, Carl riding with them. The engine roared to life, tires kicking up dust as they sped toward the glow on the horizon. As they neared Ellen's house, the full horror of it hit. Flames licked high into the sky, thick smoke curling into the darkening air. The heat was visible even from the road, the windows already collapsed and fire consuming the wooden walls. Ellen pressed her hands to her face, sobs escaping. Everything is gone. My home, my childhood, all of it. Paul's knuckles whitened on the wheel. Damn him, he muttered, jaw tight. This has Simon written all over it. He thinks he can scare us, destroy what's ours. Not on my watch. Carl, voice tight with concern, said, We need to stay calm. First, Ellen, you're safe. That's what matters. The rest, we'll handle it. Ellen turned to him, tears streaming freely. Safe? But what about the house? The church? Everything my father built? It's all gone. Paul pulled the truck to a stop a safe distance away and grabbed her hands, holding them firmly. I don't care about the house or the church. What matters is you. You're here. We're together. We'll rebuild if we have to. We'll make it through this. Ellen pressed herself into his chest, trembling. It hurts, Paul. I feel like I've lost everything. And I'll make sure you don't, he said, voice low and fierce. Simon's not taking anything else from you. I swear it. Not you. Not your land. Not the church. We'll face him and we'll win. Together. Carl placed a steadying hand on Paul's shoulder. We'll handle this. Step by step. First, make sure Ellen's all right. The rest comes next. Ellen lifted her head slightly, looking at Paul with a mixture of gratitude and fear. I don't know what I'd do without you. You won't have to find out, Paul said, pulling her close again. I've got you, Ellen. Always. The fire roared behind them, a violent, cruel reminder of Simon's malice, but they wouldn't let him stop their love. Chapter 8. The Town Divides. The morning after the fire, Paul and Ellen stood at the edge of what remained of her house. Blackened beams jutted from the ground, smoke still curling upward, and the smell of charred wood hung heavy in the air. I can't believe this, Ellen whispered, voice tight with grief. Everything is gone, all of it. Paul wrapped an arm around her shoulders, steady and protective. We'll rebuild. I promise, Ellen. And Simon? He's not going to get away with this. Word of the fire spread through town like wildfire. By midday, a crowd had gathered near the ruins, half the town murmuring support for Paul and Ellen, the other half whispering with Simon, who had appeared as if on cue, perfectly composed in his tailored suit. People of this town, Simon began, voice loud and commanding, you've seen what happens when poor decisions are made. Ellen, you can stand with me or face ruin. The land, the church, all that your late father built could be yours, or gone. A murmur ran through the crowd, some faces nodding, fearful. Simon had long cultivated relationships in town. His wealth and influence swayed many. But then old Mrs. Hargrove, who had known Ellen since she was a child, stepped forward, hands on her hips. Don't you dare blame this on her. Fires don't just happen. We know who's behind this. Others nodded, voices rising in support of Ellen. Paul's right, a local merchant shouted. This is no accident. Simon's been making threats for weeks. Simon's smirk faltered slightly. You think siding with them will protect you? He said, turning sharply on the crowd. I have friends in high places. Anyone who opposes me risks everything. Carl nudged Paul, whispering urgently. Half the town's afraid of him. Half is with you. We need a plan before he escalates. He's not stopping with the fire. Paul clenched his jaw, fists tightening at his sides. I know. And he won't scare us. Not anymore. Ellen and I will fight this together. Ellen nodded, gripping his hand. We have to. For the land, the church, and for ourselves. Simon can't win if we stand strong. Simon, realizing he didn't have unanimous control, gave a thin-lipped smile. We'll see about that. This town has its opinions, but I make the rules where it matters. Ellen. Reconsider before it's too late. He turned and strode away, his presence leaving a palpable tension in the air. The town remained divided, some worried for their own livelihoods, others enraged at Simon's brazen manipulation. Paul looked down at Ellen, determination etched into his features. We're not backing down. He can try to bully us, threaten us, but we're ready. And we'll make sure the town sees the truth. The fire had destroyed her house, but the strength and unity they shared, both with each other and with those willing to stand by them, had been forged anew in the flames. The battle with Simon had only just begun. Chapter 9: The Showdown. The next morning, tension hung heavy in the air over the small Arizona town. Word had spread that Paul and Ellen weren't backing down, and Simon had brought his own men, thugs he'd hired from outside, to intimidate the town and claim Ellen's land. Paul and his ranch hands, including Carl, had gathered early rifles and pitchforks at the ready. The rising sun glinted off the metal, giving the group an unspoken edge. "They're coming this way," Carl muttered, pointing toward the road. Dust swirled as Simon's carriage approached, 4 men on horseback flanking it. Simon himself rode with a self-satisfied smirk, dressed in his finest suit as if this were a social call rather than a confrontation. Paul's jaw tightened. "Stay calm. Don't give them the first move. Let them make the mistake." Ellen stood behind Paul, heart pounding, but hands firmly gripping the railing of the porch. "Just make sure nothing happens to anyone," she whispered. Paul glanced at her, eyes softening. "I won't let them touch anyone." Simon dismounted with exaggerated flair, surveying Paul and his men. Well, Fitzgerald. You've gathered a little army. Are you trying to impress me or just prove how stubborn you are?" "Neither," Paul said calmly. "I'm just not letting you bully my town, or the woman I love." Simon laughed, a sharp, biting sound. "Love? How quaint. Let's see if your loyalty holds when my men start breaking things." Without warning, one of Simon's goons charged, swinging a club. Paul reacted instantly, sidestepping and using the man's momentum to shove him into the dirt. A gunshot rang out from one of Paul's ranch hands and the fight erupted. Dust, fists and shouting filled the air. Paul moved like a force of nature, strong, precise and unyielding. Every move was calculated, every strike protecting his men and Ellen. His ranch hands fought with equal determination, forming a tight circle around Ellen and the women and children who had come to watch. Ellen watched, heart in her throat, as Paul disarmed a man twice his size and sent him sprawling. Carl tackled another thug, pinning him to the ground. The battle was intense but brief. Paul's familiarity with the land and his men's loyalty gave them the advantage. Simon, realizing his hired men were being overpowered one by one, turned furious. "Stop this. You can't win," he shouted. Paul advanced, unflinching. "You already lost, Simon. You just don't know it yet." The last of Simon's men dropped their weapons, retreating as fast as they could. Simon's smirk faltered, then vanished entirely. Rage flickered in his eyes, but there was no army left to back him up. This isn't over," Simon hissed, voice trembling with fury. Paul's eyes were hard, unwavering. "It is over. You leave town. Now." Simon glared for a moment longer, then mounted his horse. With a final glare at Ellen and Paul, he spurred his horse and rode away, dust clouding the road behind him. For good. The crowd that had gathered erupted into murmurs, then cheers as the tension of the past days began to lift. Ellen rushed into Paul's arms, hugging him tightly. "You did it," she whispered, tears streaming. Paul held her close, kissing the top of her head. "We did it. Together. Nothing's going to take you from me, not him, not anyone." Carl clapped Paul on the back, grinning. "Well, I always knew you could handle him. You've earned every bit of peace in this town." Paul smiled down at Ellen. "Now we rebuild. And we finally get our lives back." Ellen laughed softly, relief washing over her. "And maybe finally plan that wedding without any more fires or threats?" Paul chuckled, holding her hand tightly. "Exactly. No more Simon. No more chaos. Just us." The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the quiet town. For the first time in weeks, peace seemed possible, and Paul and Ellen could finally look forward to a future together, strong and unshakable. Chapter 10: Rebuilding and New Beginnings. The morning sun stretched across the town, painting the streets in gold. After the fire and the showdown with Simon, a sense of cautious calm settled over the town. Paul and Ellen stood together at the ruins of her house, surveying what remained. "It's going to take time," Ellen said softly, brushing soot from her sleeve. "But we can rebuild. With you here, I feel like anything's possible." Paul took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "We'll do it together. Every step of the way. And this time, no one's going to tell us how to live our lives." Carl came up behind them, grinning. "The town's already started helping. Lumber, supplies. People want to make this right after Simon's stunt. Ellen smiled faintly touched. It means a lot. I didn't think anyone would care after all the gossip. Paul's jaw tightened slightly, a wry smile forming. Gossip's always going to be there. But we don't need to listen. We know the truth, and the people who matter know it too. As the days passed, the town slowly rallied. Neighbors brought tools, materials, and meals, helping Ellen and Paul rebuild the home she had lost. The church too was repaired, its pews polished and altar restored. Paul worked tirelessly, sweat streaking his forehead, Ellen by his side, handing him nails, holding plans, and occasionally laughing at his grumbling when the carpentry wasn't going smoothly. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the mountains, Ellen and Paul sat on the porch of the newly rebuilt house, bowls of stew in hand once more. You know, Ellen said, a small smile on her lips, after everything I never thought I'd be this happy. It feels right. Paul reached across the table, brushing her hair from her face. I've waited a long time for this. To be with you properly. And now, nothing's standing in our way. Ellen laughed softly. Except maybe Mrs. Cartwright and the gossip. Paul chuckled, shaking his head. Let them talk. The entire town can gossip all they want. Simon's gone and we're finally free. Ellen reached across, taking his hand in both of hers. And now, we can start thinking about the wedding. Paul's eyes lit up. The wedding? Yeah. I think it's about time everyone else knew you're mine. The next morning, Mrs. Cartwright came bustling up to Ellen, almost vibrating with excitement. Ellen. The whole town is abuzz. Everyone is talking about the wedding. Ellen smiled indulgently. Well, I suppose it's about time, Mrs. Cartwright. Paul appeared behind her, arm around her waist. We'll make it a good one, he said with a grin, giving her a playful squeeze. And no Simon to ruin it, Ellen added, laughter in her eyes. Nope, Paul said firmly, he's gone. Forever. The weeks that followed were full of planning, laughter, and quiet moments of closeness between Paul and Ellen. Evenings were spent sitting on the porch, talking about the future, dreaming about children, and savoring the peace they had fought so hard to earn. Finally the day came. Friends and neighbors gathered in the small church, its windows catching the morning light. Paul waited at the altar, tall and proud, his brown eyes scanning the crowd until they rested on Ellen, radiant in a simple, elegant dress. She smiled, walking down the aisle with grace, and all of the hardships, the fire, Simon's threats, and town gossip melted away. In that moment there was only Paul, and only love. I love you, Ellen, Paul whispered as she reached him. And I love you, she replied, her voice steady and full of certainty. The pastor, a kind man sent from the next town over, smiled warmly as he joined their hands. By the power vested in me. As the words were spoken, sealing their vows, Ellen and Paul knew that no fire, no threat, no rumor could ever come between them again. The town had witnessed their trials and their triumphs, and now it would witness their happiness, built not from wealth or power, but from love, trust, and the unshakable bond of two hearts finally united. As they kissed, the congregation erupted in applause, and outside, the sunlight fell across the rebuilt home, the restored church, and the beginning of a life that was truly their own. Thank you for listening to the story of Ellen and Paul. Can you believe what a crook Simon was? Let's hope he never comes back. I'm going to go work on the dishes that have somehow piled up in the kitchen. Stay tuned for more stories for Evening Whispers of Love, and thanks for listening.